Thanks, Nick. So, first of all, my name is Rob McCabe. So, I started on this journey. I've been doing fantasy 30 plus years. And then only last year did I start to dabble into some things around fab. And quite frankly, because when I looked at my own skill and performance in my own leagues, I came up short in my ability to make the right fab bids. Either I wasn't bidding enough or I was bidding significantly over and not spending my money the way I thought it would. So I kind of dug in deep and took a look at where I could improve. Now, if you think about how did we get here, think about the industry where there's great stuff, great content, and a lot of content on auction, draft, ideal bidding, value bidding, and there's tons of content. But what I felt like what was lacking was really the stuff around fab. If you think about, we spend all this time from December to March getting ready for our drafts and our auctions, and we're ready to go. We got our rankings, and we're good. And then we're done draft and we start the season, and now it's time for the fab world, and it's like the wild, wild west. And there was limited analysis or insights around how do I bid correctly. And there's some great stuff out there. Ed DeCario with Baseball HQ produced something in the Forecaster 2 years ago. Great stuff. Vlad Sedler and Todd Whitestone over at FTN does a great job with kind of looking at the fab bids, what's coming. Jeff Zimmerman, Tanner Bell each year in their process write something really provocative on fab. But I think still the common theme is we don't know. We don't know really what to bid on that. So in this hour, now it's less than an hour, I'm going to talk about the 7 deadly sins of fab bidding. We'll have a little fun with that. I'm going to then show you something that I came up with last year around fab efficiency, and then we're going to take a look at like how do we do in 2023. So let's start with the first one: 7 deadly sins. So the first one is understanding your league. And so home leagues. Now, first of all, a little soapbox. To me, home leagues get a bad rap. We all talk about our larger leagues or the national leagues, but quite frankly, the home leagues is where it all started. When you talk about Ron and the history of that, everything started with the home leagues, and what that did is, in a lot of ways, it was 12 guys getting together in somebody's basement, in the back room of a bar, even an unusually cold day where we're all out on the porch trying to draft. But that's where we all got together, whether we're high school buddies, college buddies, work buddies, and that's really where it started. And while the skill set for home leagues doesn't match some of the high stakes leagues, man, that's where it all started, and it brings a sense of community. So that my little soapbox on that is about just home leagues. What do you want to know for home leagues? So one of the 7 deadly sins, we just don't understand our league trends. Like, who are the early spenders? Who are the guys who hoard their fab money looking for value later on? Do you know the guys in your league who their favorite teams are, because you know they're probably going to bid higher on those guys? And then is there dead money during the season? Because invariably that happens. We have people bidding heavy early, and then we have the All Star break and what I'll call the exodus to NFL, and all of a sudden we've got a lot of dead money, and it's really important to know that when you're doing your bidding. Similar to non-home leagues, like the NFBC and some others, we should clearly be monitoring our bid activity. We should be knowing who's spending the money, who's not spending the money, who's holding their money. So when you're going to make your bids on Sunday night, you should have a good idea of how much money is in your league and who's spending it and who needs it. So if I'm going after a stolen base guy midway through the season, I can pretty well tell who the guys are who are going to make bids because they have stolen base needs. So really understanding your league mates, understanding how much money they have, understanding what categories they're going after is going to be really helpful. So the other thing is just have a plan. We've talked about this, and I think Dave Potts on Wednesday, that feels like a week ago, talked about budgeting. Do you have per week budget? Do you have a certain amount of money that you want left for the August, September final push things like that. So really have a budget, know how much you want to spend. And then, as I just said a minute ago, is just understanding that late season dead money when all of a sudden things dry up and people aren't spending their money. So let's go number two, really lack of historical data. And this is where hopefully I've come into play. If you follow me on Twitter, where I've started taking a look at NFBC OCs and main events, looking for trends, looking for spends, things like that. And what it showed us was generally, and by the way, Ed DeCario said this 2 years ago, we're spending about 2 times the amount of the runner-up bids. So if I bid $10, generally the runner-up bid is about $5. And so there's really what I'll call a lot of wasted spend. So the key here on this seven deadly sins, just follow the trends, follow the analytics, take a look at your previous years, look for things that might give you a tell or a clue into how you should bid. So for example, previous year, how much did prospects go for? And we're going to talk about prospects here on the later slides. And by the way, did you know 8% of all NFBC OC bids chased saves? So we know that we've talked about saves and stolen bases are categories you can get on the waiver wire, on base or batting average and power less so. And so that should be something we know going in, that saves is going to be a pretty competitive bidding about. Also knowing when does the market soften. Clearly there's an all-star break miasma, lull. We all are working hard and then we have an all-star break. We probably go off and spend time with our families. And what I see is a real struggle for everybody to get back into the groove. And so you'll see a softening of the FAAB market that, by the way, coincides with the great NFL exodus. And this graph on the right is really to show you, if you think about the first half of the season, fairly flat as far as the percentage of people in main event and OCs who are inactive, meaning they didn't have a successful bid, fairly flat around the 18 to 20% mark. Then you hit that mid-season all-star break NFL exodus and look at the spike. It's significant. And it's important to know, as you are making your bids, the dead money that is occurring in the second half of season. And you may not need to bid as much as you did that you thought you would. And again, we're overspending by 2 times, and I'll show you that shortly. So, all right, let's go to the next one. All right. I don't have this in presentation mode. So then there's FOMO. We want that guy. So for, let me just move this around. Ah, dang it. So it works better if it works better if I was in presentation mode. So we're going to miss something here. So Dodger prospects. So if you think about 2023, we had Bobby Miller, Ryan Pepio, Emmett Sheehan, Michael Grove, Gavin Stone. Those were kind of the hot names. You can see their value. You can see their average bid. So what I try to do with this presentation is what does 2024 look like? And so here are a list of all the Dodger players, maybe a little different. The guys in gray more than likely are already going to be rostered. So they're not going to be guys who show up in FAAB. But what about guys like James Paxton, Brusdar Graterol, Clayton Kershaw when he returns, where he returns? Maybe Gavin Stone and Michael Grove find that and get the opportunity and they become available. We know we love Dodger prospects. Are those the guys that are going to be bid high for 2024? So what I'm trying to look at is for the FOMO, like I'm fear missing out for Dodger prospects. The other part was we want that guy. We want Taj Bradley. We want Christian Encarnacion, and we want Ellie De La Cruz, so on and so forth. We love our prospects. There's no doubt. Now, we don't love our prospects on draft day. Time and again, the really smart guys saying prospect drafting is not a smart approach. But somehow we flip the switch and we get into FAAB, and anytime a prospect comes up, we're jumping on him and we're spending a whole lot of money on that. So who will we see for 2024? So this is a graph I really liked, and it showed all the prospects in it, and it really showed week over week who is appearing. Taj Bradley in week 5. You got Zach Nito and Edward Julian, and then all of a sudden you've got other guys like Bryce Miller, Yuri Perez. So in my mind, there's this built up, pent up demand for these prospects. And then come week 12, Ellie De La Cruz blows everybody out with a $350 average bid in the OCs. And then after that, we lose our collective breath. And any prospect coming after that is a lot more temperate. A lot of guys under $100. But you can kind of see what I thought was really unique for 2023. It felt like every single week from week 4 on, there was a new prospect that was hot, that was coming up, that everybody was jumping on, that we were spending a lot of money, a lot of over $100 bids on these prospects that before the season started, a lot of scenarios would say they're risky to draft in the first place, but boy, we sure did love them when it comes time to spending our money at FAAB. Ellie De La Cruz. I got to figure out how to, because there's some really good slides, but it's in presentation mode. Here's an Ellie De La Cruz view of all the bids. And the red is the runner-up bid, and it's pretty competitive. There's no doubt that Ellie De La Cruz drew a lot of demand on this, and then it flattens out around $350, and then these rogue OC owners just went crazy up to $650 bidding on Ellie De La Cruz. That's 65% of their budget on one player, and I would argue this is some people are stars and scrubs. Some people are spread the risk. There are some people think that he's absolutely worth the $350. I'm in the other camp that I think, man, there's a lot of other ways that you could have spent $350 and gotten value in return. Prospect Love 2024. So when I think about, we knew who we had in 2023, who on this list are going to be the big spenders? And again, the gray area are guys more than likely going to be drafted. But here's what I would say is keep an eye on those, because let's say Jackson Holiday is drafted 138 in all the drafts. But let's say the Orioles, are delayed and they don't want to bring him up anytime soon. There's going to be a lot of owners who own Jackson Holiday who just are tired of stashing him on their 7 bench spots, and they're going to cut him. And so it's really important now that he's in the pool to keep an eye on when he does come back up, because I guarantee you when he comes up, any league that doesn't have him is going to bid super high. I would argue once he gets that opportunity, we may see a repeat of the LA De La Cruz on Jackson Holiday. For the teams that were patient or kept him or used up bench spot for 6 weeks, 10 weeks, 12 weeks, 15 weeks, whatever number of weeks that Jackson Holiday spends down in the minors, they would be rewarded for this. But what I want to focus on is the yellow and the red, where these are guys that are generally not being drafted. But take a look. I would argue that, do I see the same kind of names on here outside the gray that got us excited, like Taj Bradley and Bryce Miller and Bybee and Encarnacion and Ellie De La Cruz? I don't know, but again, prospects is crazy, because you might have, I don't know, just some of these guys at the far end that pop and find the right opportunity and get the at bats, and all of a sudden they're valuable, and then our FAAB bidding goes crazy. So let's go number 5, panic bidding. Anybody own Aaron Judge, Jacob deGrom, Edwin Diaz? They're barely out of the gates, and all of a sudden one of their top draft picks is gone. So what do? They think, oh my gosh, I got to hit the FAAB wire and get that guy replaced. And again, here's a list of names that are in the top 50 last year that saw significant injury time. And so if you owned any of these guys, you likely were out on the FAAB wire trying to replace them. The mistake we make is we try to replace on FAAB one for one, and you'll never replace these guys. But you can go out and find one here, the Lane Thomases. You can find the Matt McLeans when he comes. Kyle Bradish put up some nice numbers. There are ways to incrementally make up for this lost stats without kind of make the big bang that a lot of we do. We panic bid. And then on the right, we fab for saves. Again, saves and stolen bases, probably the category that has the most opportunity to acquire in your fab. And if you were one of those guys who don't go after the top 6 closers, these names on the right, you know very well because you lived in that pool. You fished in that pond because you didn't want to bid, on the Class A or some of the other elite guys in the first 5 rounds. So you fished in this pool of Kyle Finnegans and Alzolay and Trevor May and Pierce Johnson when he was a Colorado, and then he lost his value coming to the Braves. Tanner Scott, remember that name. Tanner Scott won a lot of people some championships based on his last 2 months. But that's the pool that we're spending a lot of our saves. So when we lose an Edwin Diaz, we're now out there looking for one of these names and hoping that if I get Kyle Finnegan, I'm going to get 28 saves, and I kind of made up for Edwin Diaz. And you can see some of those others. Absolutely. If you're not I got to get a closer, a solid closer early, and then I don't have to worry about it, man, you fished in this pond probably more times than you ever wanted to. Hot starts. I love this slide. So the next one is guys with hot start, small sample, Chris Bubich. So let's take a closer look. Chris Bubich, if you look at the bottom, this is the 2023 forecaster write-up. What do I see? I see ugly, shaky, walks were plentiful, regression bad. Nothing in here, thanks Ryan Bloomfield for writing this up. Nothing in this write-up suggests that Chris Bubich should be on your roster. But what happens? April 4th, 5 innings, 2 earned runs, 4 strikeouts. Not bad. And then he has 6 innings, no runs, 9 strikeouts. And all of a sudden the fantasy world says, this is a guy I got to have because he's figured it out. Regardless of regression, shaky, ugly, bad, forget all that. He's the real deal. Well, guess what? What happens? On the right side, you'll see the RotoWire notification. Hey, he goes on the injured list. Needs a second opinion. Oh, maybe there's a chance that he's okay. He requires Tommy John surgery, undergoes surgery, transferred to 60-day IL. And just like that, Chris Bubich is a distant memory on anybody's. And that sigh of relief, again, is Ryan Bloomfield, who wrote that write-up and didn't have to see possibly Chris Bubich figured it out and had a great season because injury derailed him. So we avoided that potential. Recency bias. Anybody remember Brian Anderson? Okay. Brian Anderson, if you look closely on April 3rd and 4th, he had 3 home runs against the Mets, who subsequently the Brewers homestand, they beat the Mets 19-0, which probably was a harbinger of things to come for the Mets. Little did they know on April 3rd, now that they had Verlander and Scherzer and they've spent money, and that 100-win season where they came up short against the Braves last year was going to be a memory. And boy, they're going to take it on. This is the season for the Mets 2023. Well, that Milwaukee series was a smack in the face, and Brian Anderson was the face of that with 3 home runs. So if you look at the bottom, you can see the blue bar is the number of ads in the OC, and it went crazy. So everybody added him. Anybody who owns Brian Anderson knows what happened after those 3 home runs, next to nothing. So the bars, and it's small, but it means there's not a lot of red, which means cuts. People were like, he'll be all right. He'll be all right. Man, I got 3 home runs from him. And then about week 7 and on, slowly he was cut from rosters. And then by the end of week 18, he was but a distant memory, not rosterable, not on anybody's. But that recency bias of those 3 home runs, that fateful chilly spring, well, they're indoors, Milwaukee, that fateful spring 19-0 shellacking of the Mets gave people hope, and the recency bias certainly influenced them. Other recency biases that we had in 2023. Anybody who's at First Pitch Arizona in 2022 certainly knew all about Matt Mervis. He was the hot hitter. I think he won the home run contest. We came away saying, Matt Mervis, boy, he's somebody to tuck away and remember. Jordan Walker, anybody a year ago who's down in First Pitch, Florida, we all saw him hit 2 mammoth tape measure home runs. And while it's not like Jordan Walker was a hidden talent, we all kind of knew about him. But there's no doubt that those spring training home runs pumped him up a little bit higher. Of course, Ollie Marmol had other things to say and became a fantasy Walker owner's nightmare by not giving him the opportunity. And then how many people, the Sunday bump? You're working on your FAAB bids, and then all of a sudden, some SP5 has a really nice Sunday afternoon outing, and all of a sudden, he's now in consideration for. Let me throw some money at this guy. Patrick Corbin, man, he had one outing. There's something in him. Let me go ahead and bid $15, $20 on him, and then you paid the price for the rest of the season. So what does 2024 look like? How do we predict? Because we know there will be recency bias. It might be fill in the blank, some Oakland A's guy who comes out of nowhere. How many had Rooker last year? So there's going to be an Oakland A guy because of opportunity that exceeds what we think of them. By and large, most Oakland A guys are kind of off the radar, not startable. Patrick Corbin, let's say he has a hot start. He's an ADP 553 right now. I guarantee you, if he has a hot start, somebody's going to be desperate for a starting pitcher stats, and they're going to draft him. They're going to FAAB him. Let's say DL Hall, let's see, for the Orioles, he gets a start, ADP 455. Let's say he starts 2-0. All of a sudden, heads turn, and now he becomes a hot FAAB guy, all based on recency bias. So we're allowing the recent past to influence our FAAB bidding, and that's what I'll call one of the seven deadly sins. Make sure I got all that. All right, so those are the 7. Let me take a deep breath here now. So let me get back to FAAB efficiency. So if I think about my own game, every year I look at my game and I say, where did I come up short? And I was really frustrated in my leagues that I was overbidding on players, underbidding on guys. I was all over the board, and I didn't feel like I was maximizing my FAAB bidding well enough. But I didn't have a way to measure how well I was doing. And if you don't measure something, if you're not keeping score, you're practicing. So how do you know how well we're doing with FAAB? So I sat down, crunched some numbers, came up with a FAAB efficiency model. And if you've followed me on Twitter, you've seen me tweet some of this stuff. Again, back to Ed DeCario, when he wrote in the Forecaster, he actually had something similar. We had the same, we came about it differently, but it's the same concept. His was more of a 120% kind of thing. And so I came up with that, and I tested it in my local leagues, and then I went kind of national when I was able to start scraping NFBC main event and OC, and that was for a data guy. I hit Nirvana. I had a huge data set that I could start analyzing what these 2 national leagues were doing, and I'll tell you how we did. Now, my big caveat is FAAB efficiency has nothing to do with the quality of the player. I might be really good at bidding $1 more than my runner-up, but if I'm bidding and getting guys who are of no value, that doesn't mean a thing. So I want to make sure and caveat. I'm not suggesting that FAAB efficiency is now the be-all, end-all. But if you think about before this, I had no idea whether I'm overbidding or whether the league or the industry is overbidding. And based on what I did this year, I think there's a clear sense, and I'll talk about it in a little bit, of where we landed. So what's that mean? In 2023, our main event FAAB efficiency was 56%. Online championships, 45. Now, you know what that means. 45 means your average bid was more than twice what the runner-up was. So again, like I said earlier, if I'm bidding $10, if the runner-up was $4, the ideal bid would have been $5, but I bid $10, and so I had a 50% efficiency rating. Now, main event is a little bit better, and you guys know clearly the main event population in the pool is different. It's smaller. Online championship is broader. Bubba always talks about the OCs being the wild, wild west. We have a huge number of players that are a lot more in the player pool for FAAB than we have main event, which creates a higher variation of who's being obtained. But I would argue that we're just not very good. And I did this for my home leagues. We weren't very good, and I thought, well, it's just home leagues, maybe we don't know what we're doing. But I found the same thing in main event and online championships. So if those guys are spending in upwards to twice the amount that they should have, then I think we have an industry shortfall where we're not doing a very good job. The best efficiency in OC was 74 to 79%. Well, in main event, it was more than 77. So a little bit better in main event. I mean, I would argue that in 2024, if we can get efficiency of 65 to 70, man, we're doing pretty good. And again, if I'm giving you $1,000 to spend to improve your team over each of the 27 weeks, but you're really only using 500 or $600, you're basically, you're putting $500, half of your money down the drain by overbids. I'm not sure that that's the right way to manage your money, because again, there's two ways. There's a couple ways to improve your team: is draft day and auction, acquiring your talent then, and then in FAAB. Now in local leagues where there's trading, you can trade. So there's the third one. But in some of these industry leagues, there's really only two ways that you can improve your team. And if you're only using half of what assets you're given in FAAB to improve your team, I think there's an opportunity there. So here's a graph of, so I'm just showing line over line, because I thought midway, main event 56%, we got over 60 a couple times. I thought, well, as the pool goes down, as you can clearly see, the average bid price goes down after the All-Star break, the NFL exodus. I thought, well, we'll get tighter with our spend. And in fact, it actually got worse. In fact, the lower our bids were, the more we were overspending. So maybe we were bidding $50, $60 and we're 60% efficient there. But now that we're in the world of $5, $10 bids, man, we're still overbidding because we're not considering the inactivity or the dead money that's happening in your leagues. And I think that's an opportunity. So when I go back to the 7 deadly sins, understanding the analytics, understanding your league behaviors, I think there's opportunity there. So this slide I actually did at like 4 a.m. last night because it hit me. And uncontested bids. These are bids you make where there was no runner-up bid. So let's look at this. This is online championship. There's 96,000 plus winning bids, of which 48,930 were uncontested. That's 51% of every single winning bid was uncontested. That's, to me, mind-blowing. And of that 51, if you translate it into dollars, of the $2.2 million spent of the 2,460 teams, 18% of all of our spend was against uncontested bids. So you could argue that $399,000, you could have bid $1 on those guys and you would have still gotten the guy. Now you might say, well, Rob, second half of the season, it's all $1 and $2 bids. Fair enough. So if you look at the bottom, 42% of all those 48,000 plus bids were $1 and $2. That makes sense. So, your uncontested bid is only $1 or $2 above what you actually bid. And then 20% are $3 to $5, but there's still, you look at the $6 to $10 bids, 11 to 20, and then more than $20 bids. That's 37% of all of our bids that we bid more than $6 or more, but there's nothing, there's uncontested. So this is where I almost feel like we're bidding against ourselves. We are, I got to get this guy because I have an injury. I'm going to bid $20. By the way, I have the money, so I don't care. So I'm going to bid that. And then crickets, nobody else bids that. 37% of the 48,000 plus bids were $6 or more. I think there's an opportunity there. And then this is a gray, but it just kind of shows you the increased trajectory week over week over the percentage of uncontested bids. What's interesting is even the first half of the season, it's like 40%. It's like 40% that are uncontested. So weeks 4, 5, 6, there's still a lot of bids that out there that you're bidding and nobody else is. So keep that in mind. That I think we're like, got to have that guy. Get your guy. We're bidding against ourselves in many ways because nobody else is bidding. I always find the bottom right really interesting. Who are my outliers? There's 4 guys that have more than $250 bids that went uncontested. Tanner Scott, and I hid the team name to protect the innocent. So I'm not calling out anybody. But in week one, somebody loved Tanner Scott and they bid $289 in their league against a zero runner up. Now, if you've done this enough, that's a gut punch. You're like, well, I just lit a fire to $288. That really hurts starting off. And that's week one. 2 weeks later, clearly a Mets fan decides that Francisco Alvarez is worth $310, but apparently nobody else in his league thought so either. So he got the bargain for Francisco, who gave decent numbers, like although the batting average. But man, he spent 31% of all of his FAAB in week three. That changes significantly his approach to how to spend the money going forward. Week 8, there was somebody who loved Casey Schmidt, couldn't live without him. They put 310 and they got him with no other bid. And then week 19, Chris Sale, it's like, I got to have him. I think he's going to turn it around. He's going to be the difference maker. I'm making a run. So let me bid on that. By the way, these 4, I don't have a list here, didn't finish anywhere close to the overall. I mean, they're probably 1,500th or lower. So the lower third percentile in all of that. All right, now I'm going to go into FAAB value. Now this is I'm going to tiptoe through this because this is kind of a dangerous way, because it's hard to apply value, because value I'm going to show is for a full year. And we know the real benefit of picking up guys for 2 weeks is hitting on those 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks where the guy's giving value and not having. So I'm going to caveat that this is directionally correct, but I have a point that I'm trying to get to. Here's a graph of all the bids, and I have the average bid value and then the value plus or minus. Now, some of these, like this one here is Ellie, but he's really a $17. So there was a glitch and a timing issue. But what that shows you, I can see guys here who got value and they're all up and down the board. I also can see guys who got negative value, and I spent $100, $125. So I mean, it's an equal opportunity. So what I was looking at, is there a sweet spot? Is there more than, if you're averaging a bid over $50 or 10 to 50 or less than 50? And what we have here, if you look at the next slide, here are the $50 bids. These are the names we all know. These are the hot prospects we loved. By and large, they got pretty good return here. There's Ellie, $17. But man, we spent $350 on this, so ignore this $7. But I also burned by Taj Bradley, Matt Mervis, Mason Miller. Mason Miller, we loved his videos. We fell in love with his pitch. We spent $100 on him. A few weeks later, he goes down. We don't hear from him again to injury. Taj Bradley, what could go wrong? He's a Ray. The Rays know what they're doing. They're bringing him up. I'm going to bid over $100. And the problem with Taj Bradley and a lot of people is if you're spending over $100, the Sharks know this, but the average fan, I'm not cutting Taj Bradley because I just spent $130 on this guy. I'm going to hold on to him because I think he's going to turn it around. And what happens is you keep starting him, start over start, and he really hurts you. And that $100, the 125, exponentially hurts your team because you're not willing to cut him. And the really smart players know to don't get emotional, move on, take your losses, get Taj out of your lineup because he's going to do nothing but hurt you. So these are the $50. I'd argue there's some success, but there's also a lot of these $50 more that aren't really earning you the return. Here's what I like, the 10 to 50. Man, there's a lot of positive value over here. The Kyle Bradish, Lane Thomas, Marcell Ozuna, Kim, CJ Abrams, all these guys return really good value, but you didn't spend $350 on them like you did Ellie De La Cruz. You spent $10 to $50. So you really got value out of this. And I would argue this is the sweet spot right here, the 10 to 50. You know, we can spend $350, but man, I could have gotten, if you look at this on another slide, I probably could have gotten Bradish, Thomas, Ozuna, and Kim all for less than what I spent on Ellie De La Cruz. And I would have really benefited from these guys' stats. And then the less than $10, this is the fishing in the bargain bins. Tanner Scott, this guy, he doesn't go away. He shows up everywhere. On average, $14, average bid $10. We didn't spend hardly any money on him, but when it came time to finding those saves at the end, if you own Bautista and you're like, what am I not doing now without Bautista? You went out and got Tanner Scott. You more than ably filled your closer role. So definitely some misses, but there's also some hits at the net less than $10 value. Now this view right here is what guys have positive value that showed up on the highest percentile of teams in the OC. So Tanner Scott was on many teams, and the average finish of those teams within the 75th percentile. So I would argue, based on this, is Tanner Scott had the biggest impact of all of the FAAB bids. Now, he was added 283 times. He was also cut 94 times. So there's a few times where people added him, cut him, and it wasn't like a one-time thing. But other guys like Skubal, Crawford, Bradish, Bybee, Ober, Abrams, Torkelson, those are the names that are showing up on the best OC finishing teams. And look at their bids. There's one guy, Tanner Bybee. Everybody else is less than $50. And I would argue that's your sweet spot. How do you maximize your under $50 bids and get the most out of it? I mean, you can play the game of spending $150, $250. I would argue it's a really risky proposition, and you're putting a lot of money into this. So, last slide, and then I can look at the questions. So, what I like to do is study the behavior of people who are successful. So on this slide here is you got Drew Forte. He won the overall OC championship. And then on the right is Brian Slack. He won the main event. And so I like to look at, well, these guys won. How did they do it? And so let's talk about Drew first of all. There's some really great names there. And by the way, Chaz McCormick, he's owned a couple times. But what I see there is, other than Chris Sale, which I think Drew has said process worked, but the results did not. That is his only bid more than $100. Where did Drew live? Drew lived in the $18, $16, went up to $40, $44 for Ober, $55 for Matt McClain, who was a good bid, but he lived in that $50 less. And look at all the positive value that Drew got. Kim, Steer, Scott, Outman. He eventually got the value out of Chaz McCormick, Matt McClain, some really good values that he got by fishing in the $50 less pond and not fishing in the $100 or more. Now, Brian Slack, if you look on the right, look at his bids: 11, 5, 10. Josh Naylor, Waka, Berger, got some really good values. Spent a little more on Edmund and Casas, but he got some values. The only thing is he fell prey to the Chris Bubich recency bias. So he bid 188 based on probably that one outing. And then I'm pretty sure quickly he cut him and moved on and took his losses. So that was it. What I had, and it didn't show up because I wasn't in slide mode, was Ellie De La Cruz, which is really fascinating. Did you know that all the money spent in OC, 3% of the entire money spent was on Ellie De La Cruz? And you might think 3%. That's, I don't know. What does that mean? The second highest spent on a single player was 1.9. So Ellie De La Cruz was a significantly higher spend of the entire online championship player pool. And I would argue, and I had a slide here, that for the most part, he was not on many championship teams. He was on a few. He was on more in online championships. And bat flip crazy, Toby was finished fourth. I'm going by memory. He had him. And Toby, when I talked to him in First Pitch Arizona, he said, I could say this. He said he regrets taking Ellie De La Cruz. It changed the way he was able to bid for the rest of the season. And if he had to do it over again, he would not have bid the $350 on that. Now, that's not to say that Ellie isn't on some really good teams, but I would argue I think those teams are really good, not because of Ellie, but in spite of Ellie and the $350, is they had some other really good successes, whether it's draft day or other stuff that made them successful. So let me hit the last page here. Final thoughts. I would argue quit overbidding. So we overbid, and we've got to figure this out. 70%. If you think about what you think you're going to bid. If you were to bid 70% of what you would, you're probably going to get the target in anyway. Again, we're overbidding by 2 times. Value lies everywhere, but especially in the $10 to $50 range. Don't waste your money. My opinion. This is different people believe different things. I believe that if you're bidding on guys over $100, you're not getting the return back that you could if you fish in the $10 to $50 range. Broader, don't fall prey to the 7 deadly sins. We all do that. That's why they're sins, because we can't say no to them. And then the last thing is, I kick this up even more. Usually FAAB is not an off-season topic, but once the season starts, I'll start posting. What's really interesting for me this year, since I have 2023 as a baseline for online championships and main event, I'm really going to compare the two to see how we're doing differently. I would love to say that we've learned our lesson and now we have additional information like this. Our behavior may change. Sadly, sins are sins, and it's hard to say no, and we'll continue to commit our 7 deadly sins. Probably won't be as much as I thought, but I'd like to be hopeful that we are continuing to evolve in the way we are making our FAAB bids and how much we are. So I'd say if you want more of this, follow me at Slee Rat Nation. By the way, it's backwards for Tar Heels, which shows my allegiance in other sports. So I'll be posting that. The other thing I'm going to do is I've got it set up. I really want to monitor the prospects, and I want to be able to see how many started the season on rosters in OCN main event, how many, and then when they get added, how many are adding them, what's the price tag, and I'm just going to track that through the season because I'm really interested in the prospect FAAB bidding behavior. So I think that's going to be really interesting. And again, I'm always looking for other stories that come out of the data. Sometimes I hit a dead end. Sometimes I find an aha. Like to me, the uncontested bids is a big aha. So I think there's more of that to come. So I love looking at data and looking for stories. And the last thing before Nick comes back on or I take questions, donate to ALS. It's a great cause. What Nick is doing here in PitchCon is unbelievable. The fantasy baseball community is like none other, that people who compete for different sites come together and help each other out. And I'm just in awe of the partnership that everybody has. We're all trying to make this better. We're all trying to improve. We're all trying to learn from each other. And it's just amazing that competitors come on each other's podcasts and share information or come together like this, or in First Pitch or First Pitch Florida, First Pitch Arizona. I'm just really blown away by the sense of community that we have here in the fantasy baseball industry.